the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything. All it takes is some time and some clarity to find your identity. It's mind over everything.
The last of Season 1's updates is finally here, bringing with it a bunch of new features, new shops, a new void boss, new difficulty for missions, new modules, and even a new weapon perfect for Hayley. But the biggest one of the bunch is the much awaited ultimate form of Freyna, giving us another reason to dive into her builds, especially after a glow up a couple of weeks back. In this video we'll be looking at my go-to build for missions, perfect for taking on both solo and public missions at that all new 400% difficulty. I'll explain what key pieces of gear you'll need, what modules to slot in, and even discuss the ideal unique weapons while we're at it to keep that lethality going. As always, if you did learn something with this video, please consider subscribing. I have a bunch of other builds on the back burner for Freyna, so if you want to see more from this character, you won't find a better location than right here. With that out of the way though, let's get into it. Alright, perfect. So as we always do, let's head ourselves over to our module section. We'll have a talk about all the builds that pretty much goes into this. Now you will notice we do have several different tabs here. We do have a mobbing. We do have an alternative for the mobbing, which is going to be a little bit more involved than this first build, because this one's just basically going to be just it's simple mode. It is essentially just kind of like activate a skill, let it do its business, and then move on to the next one. Whereas the mobbing ult will actually go in a little bit more into helping with elite, as well as bosses that you'll find at the end of those 400%. But it's a bit more involved. It will take a little bit more in terms of like skill rotation, in terms of like learning it a little bit more. So we'll explain that one afterwards. Let's cover the main basics of this build and explain why this one works the best. So of course this all bases itself around the main module, which is going to be the Transcendence mod of Contagion. Now I understand that Freyna is able to do what she can do without the need for Contagion, because toxic puddles will spawn at a 50% rate. Being able to spread themselves around, we're able to increase their range, and with enough enemies they will essentially be able to spread themselves around, and just enough for this to essentially clear a room by itself if you get lucky with those procs. The reason why Contagion is the best ad clearer right now in this game though is because that Contagion is 100% detonation. Being able to trigger this to then detonate more enemies and essentially just keep that just keep going and going and going, it just gives you that consistency and gives you the consistent feel to the build. And while it does sacrifice a little bit on damage over time modifiers, because we are losing out on things like Panic, I think it is, and we've got Nightmare and everything like that, we're just relying on that Room Zero trauma. Because of the amount of damage that we're putting into this build, it does not matter. This is enough for us to be able to basically clear it out, and consistency is the name of the game, which we'll talk about a little bit later with a couple of these other mods that we're going to have in here. Now to really make Contagion work though, we need a few things. It basically relies on itself on cooldown, it relies on range, and it relies on damage to be able to get those procs off, rather than being able to activate it and then you finish them off with a weapon to then start that chain reaction. Now there are a few ways that we're going to do this, and we will go into every single one of those categories right now, so why don't we have a start with some of the older mods that we just chucked straight into here. First off, we do have both focuses on, so we have focus on tech and focus on toxic. Both of these are huge ways of being able to increase the damage over time multipliers, but also increasing the main kind of modifier when it comes to the actual projectiles as well. So both of these are definitely a mainstay, because not only do they increase the damage, they also go double and go into that skill cooldown, which we definitely need for Contagion. Now we do go into cooldown even more, because we do also pick up both MP conversion as well as nimble fingers. While technically this might be a little bit overkill, the reason why we've gone for both of these is, one, it's going to help us with our rolling, which is going to help us with faster clears when it comes to missions, but it's also going to help us be able to get our abilities back, so that we can actually just kind of cast it in one side of the group, and then we can just zip ourselves over and cast it the other side of the group as well. And by the time we've done that, we've got one of our other abilities back, so we can just basically keep alternating just keep spreading that contagion round. Skill cooldown is also massive for the ultimate in skill 4, because this is going to be your main way of being able to take down elites, be able to take down bosses ridiculously quick. So the faster we can get this down off cooldown, the better this build is going to feel. And at this moment in time, with the cooldown we do have, this currently sits at 28.3 seconds. Now I would like to get this down a little bit further. You can do this with things like reactors, and we're also going to discuss that a little bit with the alternative build as well. Now for the third part of the category that we did mention for Contagion, we do have range. This is going to come in the form of skill expansion as well as maximize range. Basically being able to do this gets us up to 186.7 additional percent of range. It's not enough to be able to hit the cap just by itself, but with things like reactors, with things for the alternate build as well, we are able to do that through the use of our modules. But this is more than enough. I'm able to hit the cap because I do have a reactor that does have a blue roll into range, and that means that I'm able to reach out and hit that cap of the additional 200%, so capping out at that 300%. So the Toxic Swamp does have a radius of 12 meters, which is absolutely nutty, and that just gives me enough spread to be able to hit a bunch of enemies all at the same time, and then when those detonations goes off, it essentially is able to reach out and touch other enemies as well, and this is how we're able to get those chain reactions going throughout the whole room. Now we do also have an increased HP mod in here, which is just nice quality of life, and we also have gone for MP Collector. Now usually in the past I've just kind of advised against this mod because I don't like the consistency of it, but because of how many enemies we're detonating all at once, there is a very good chance we're able to kind of proc 1 or 2 of this every single time we go into a room, so therefore this will pretty much get us back up to max MP every single time. I do think this is pretty much good. I do think this is you know, probably one of the better kind of like mobbing if we're going to cast out multiple abilities, if it's a case that we need to cast more, like several different locations all at the same time. I do think the MP Collector pretty much does take its worthy. You definitely could swap this in for something else to increase the amount of damage if you do want to. I probably would recommend Dangerous Ambush for that instead, if you do feel like you don't have any MP woes. This will give you extra skill attack when you take down enemies that aren't targeting you, and because of how often we're able to proc this across a whole room, there's a very good chance that some of those enemies will not be targeting you just yet, so therefore that's an extra almost 25% damage right there. Now lastly, that just leaves us 2 other mods that we got to talk about, which are brand new mods that did come in with Ultimate Freyna just dropping, and this is going to be the Amplification mod. So this is going to be Tech Amplification as well as Toxic Amplification. Now how these ones work is similar to like what we have for the Battle and the Attack mods. Essentially they come on to increase our skill power further, as well as our skill power modifiers. So we're essentially just double dipping into kind of like these mods once again. It's just like having a duplicate. The only downside is that it does then take away our ability to crit. So this one will reduce our critical hit damage down to basically nothing, and then our Amplification for Tech will then reduce our critical hit rate down to essentially nothing. The reason why we want to be able to grab these is because Freyna works so perfectly with them because we already have a very low base of 5%. So therefore, even if we invested all 4 critical mods into this, we would max out at around about 15-16%, I think it is, if I remember right, which is not consistent enough to be able to justify 4 mod slots in this build. So therefore, just being able to take up 2 and just give ourselves a massive consistency increase to the amount of damage we will be dealing for our damage over time, as well as our actual abilities hitting in the first place, it is basically a no-brainer, and it frees up 2 more slots, allowing us some extra quality of life. Now skipping on over to the ultimate build, the only change that has come here is being able to swap out MP Collector for something like Multi-Talented. The reason why this build differs from that one though in terms of how it feels is because this one relies you to be able to keep an eye on what buff you do have for Multi-Talented. You'll notice that every single ability, apart from a skill 2, is going to be Tech, whereas a skill 2 is going to be Dimension. Now what this one means is that when you cast your Tech, this will give you an extra 15% skill power modifier, but also 15% skill effect range, allowing you to hit the cap without the need for your reactor. And if you do manage to get the Dimension one, this gives you a minus 20.5% skill cooldown for 5 seconds, which is absolutely huge and is especially useful for your ultimate. This means that you're able to get this down to around about 11 seconds, if I remember right, which is absolutely bonkers, meaning every single 11 seconds you're able to bring out your massive gun that is going to deal so much damage to elites, it's going to do so much damage to bosses. It is able to wipe out rooms by itself. It triggers contagion on top of that, so if you just want to go around with this gun, feel free to be able to do that. You can open up with this. It's bonkers as to how good Venom Baptism is in this build, and therefore, because you're able to use multi-talented, as long as you keep an eye on that skill cooldown, you're able to get a lot out of this as well. So therefore, this is going to be the ultimate build. Like I said, this does require a little bit more micromanagement, but it is still a fantastic build, and it will allow you to be able to go through those elites and bosses much faster than the first one. So we've talked about modules, so let's head ourselves over to the gear. Now, the gear of choice, we'll start with the Reactor and start working our way down. So we do have this Toxic Mechanics Reactor, which is my go-to for the mobbing side of things. The main things you want to focus when it comes to Reactor is Toxic Mechanics. You want to make sure it's got Toxic and Tech Skill Power Boost ratios in it. In terms of like optimization, you want to get Secret Garden if you're going for a mobbing build. It doesn't matter too much if you need a bossing build, because the Secret Garden buffs do not pass over, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of the roles that you want at the bottom, you do have a lot of kind of like good roles that you can kind of go for. There's some very good kind of like ones in terms of like the most amount of damage. Tech and toxic roles ratios are going to be pretty much the best in slot when it comes to that. If you're not able to hit the range cap, you can get a blue roll like I do here, which will then allow you to be able to bump that up to basically get that last little bit that you need. To be completely honest with you, that extra range that we're missing is around about 0.5 meters worth of range. It's not very, it's not a lot, to be completely honest with you. So if you do want to go for damage instead, completely understand that. You can definitely go for that instead. A roll into cooldown, a roll into skill duration up is also pretty decent, so there are a few good ones that you can get. The main trap that you don't want to fall into, though, is any rolls into crit. If you get any kind of roll into crit, it is a dead roll as far as we're concerned. Any kind of increase will just get nullified by any of the mods that you do have over with the amplification over in the module section. So get any kind of like crit increase, whether it's damage or whether it's hit rate, is just going to do absolutely nothing for you. So make sure if you are finding like farming for reactors, just avoid crits basically like the plague. As for component sets, it's one of those where there's really good sets that do exist, but nothing really kind of comes close to the raw power, the raw DPS that Slayer set pretty much brings to the table. This works twice, it gives you two really nice bonuses to it. Not only is it going to boost your skill power by that 26.1%, which is absolutely huge, it does increase your skill cost though, so that it does have that kind of offset, but because we're only casting the ability once and then we've got MP Collector, we're really able to kind of like offset what that's actually trying to do. So we will be able to reduce the skill. We'll basically recover our MP back before that skill cost really becomes a problem. But on top of that, having it at a 4-piece also gives you rounds per magazine. This does feed into your ultimate ability, so this means you do have 9% extra magazine size. So that's really nice to be able to have. It's only a couple of extra rounds. I think it's like around about 4 or something like that. But still, that is a few extra rounds that you did not have. And because this is the best way to be able to increase skill DPS, it's also really nice to have those extra shots as well. Now, alternatively, you could mess about with a 2-piece into the Venom set, which will give you plus 6.2% into Toxic Skill Power, as well as a 2-piece into the Swamp Recon, and that will also give you an additional 6.2%. But that works out to be around about half the bonus that you would be getting from the Slayer sensors, or the Slayer set in the first place. It essentially is just a way of trying to get around that skill cost, but in terms of like the raw power, the Slayer set is pretty much the best that pretty much exists in this game. Now, in terms of roles that you're looking out for when it comes to components, you are looking out for anything that increases HP, increases defense, increases your MP viability. In this case, we do have the on the auxiliary power, being able to go for MP recovery out of combat and max HP. That's the God roll. When it comes to the sensor, max MP and MP recovery in combat is also the God roll. When it comes to the memory, though, I am missing, unfortunately, the best in slot. You do want to get defense, but you're also looking out for the MP. I've got one around here. MP recovery modifier. If I was able to get that on here, that would be absolutely perfect, and that would essentially be the best way to keep my MP topped up as well. In terms of like processor, you can go with anything really. Extra shield, extra resistance, anything like that will be absolutely fine. So that brings us over to the weaponry, just to kind of wrap up this build, and I'm only really going to talk about the Secret Garden now. We do have, obviously, the Fallen Hope, which is mediocre as it currently stands. I'm really hoping that gets buffed, but as it currently stands, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really kind of like link up with Freyna anymore, because it requires you to be able to hit a poisoned enemy, and ever since her change, she doesn't actually deal poison anymore, which is a bit of a shame. We do also have the Python, which is going to reduce toxin resistance. Now this one I do believe actually does work. This should actually help you out with some of the skills. The only downside is that that is all it's going to be giving you, though. It's going to be giving that resistance, and it gives more when it comes to non-attribute for some reason. So, you know, it's still not the best. Now, increasing raw DPS, though, that's where the Secret Garden starts to shine. The reason why is if we go over here to the unique ability, we're focusing on this second bit, which is if you use a tech skill, it has a chance of being able to give you pest control. At 4 ranks, this does give you a 50% chance every time you activate a tech ability, which is going to be 1 and your 3. Your 4 technically can activate it, but because it puts the Secret Garden away, the buff will not stay around, so just basically focus on your 1 and 3. What this does is that once you start building up stacks, you will get additional skill power as well as firearm attack. So it is a great way of being able to double dip into your weapon, as well as being able to then give you extra damage or DPS increases on your actual abilities as well. So the lower cooldown we have for our kind of build, the easier it is to spam our tech abilities, the easier it is to be able to get our max stacks all the way up to the top, and that means more damage basically overall. So when it comes to the Secret Garden, though, in terms of like what you want to build, there are only a couple of things that you do really want to focus on. Now, most notably, what you need are increases to your fire rate as well as increases to your magazine. Now, this will transfer over to your skill 4. So anything else outside of that you can build around to be able to increase the viability of the weapon. So things like firearm attack and all that kind of thing, while they're not going to help your skill 4, they are going to help it being able to make the Secret Garden a decent weapon. So the main things that you definitely need slotting in every single time are going to be fire rate up. This is the biggest increase to your fire rate. We also have expand weapon charge, which is going to increase your rounds per magazine. Same with compulsive magazine, which is also going to hurt your weak points but doesn't actually do anything to the ultimate. And then we also have sharp precision shot, which is going to be a case of as you hold down the trigger, the faster you fire with your gun. The ultimate is going to benefit from that, but it's not going to benefit from the firearm attack, so just keep that in mind. But essentially this is going to be the best way to be able to put out the most DPS with your ultimate, and it just means that you don't have to rely too much when it comes to duration abilities. And there we have it, my ultimate Freyna mobbing setup. This truly can handle all the main elements of the game you need right now, stopping just outside of those Colossus fights. Now, while it can do some work in that, it makes more sense to go into a more boss-centric build, and I do have that in the works. It's just testing a few more things out before I get that created, so I know that it's the best it can be for your use. If that's something that you're interested in, make sure to sub to the channel to find your way back once that drops. But this is the section I want to hear from you. How are you still finding the first Descendant? Do you think Freyna is currently balanced? And will you be farming for her ultimate form? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. And as I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well. And I'll see you all on the next video.